Good morning, everybody. If we could move towards your seat, please. We, as usual, like to start on time.
So did you let him be on it? No, we didn't. So there's, let's see, Phil Thomas out of town, so that's 6. I think Coheed was good, but I thought it could be developed as residential.
All right. Good morning again. I'll call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum, and thank you for coming, everyone, this morning. I know that today being the national observance of the 9/11 events from 18 years ago, I know that many people have busy schedules. Try to keep our meeting brief today. We'll start with introductions. I'm Norm Steen, Teller County Commissioner, serving as your chair. Let's start on this end, and we'll move around the table then. Sharon?
I guess should you go first? Can Holly go next? She's next.
Go ahead.
Sharon Thompson, City of Fountain Treasurer.
Holly Williams, El Paso County Secretary.
Jill?
Jill Gabler, Colorado Springs.
Mine's not working. Oh, there it is.
Tyler Stevens, Green Mountain Falls.
Nancy Fortune, Manitou Springs.
Turner Smith, Town of Raymond.
Gary Faust, Donner Lake.
Don Wilson, Town of Monument.
Rod Chisholm, Deputy Garrison Commander, Fort Carson.
Good morning, Brian Hartless. I'm the commander of the 10th Air Base Wing at Air Force Academy.
I'm Ron Jeffrey. I'm the Director of Staff, 50th Space Wing, Shreve Air Force Base.
Jen Fitch, IMA to the Commander Peterson.
Rocky Scott, Transportation Commissioner.
Terry Storm, EDC and Chamber Military Affairs Council Representative.
Dick Elsner, Park County.
Karen Rose, CDOT Director, Region 2.
Stan Van Werf, El Paso County Commissioner.
Andy Gunning, Executive Director of PPACG.
Good morning, everybody, and again, welcome. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Motion second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
It's approved. Thank you. Public comments. I'd like today to start in a way that we normally do not start, and that's in observance of our 9/11 ceremony. Obviously a big important day for America. Most of you know where you were at that moment. I know exactly where I was on the morning of September 11, 2001. So I'd ask you to stand. Just have a few comments, and then we'll take appropriate other steps. On the morning of Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, beginning just before 9 a.m. Eastern Time, 4 highly coordinated terrorist attacks carried out by the Al-Qaeda terrorist organization against the United States of America. That morning, 18 years ago, this morning, 2,996 people were killed and over 6,000 were injured. The subsequent cost to America as a result of 9/11, however, staggering and must also be remembered. In the years that followed, it cost the United States nearly $21.8 billion to replace the buildings and infrastructure in New York City, Pentagon, and in the cleanup costs of Ground Zero. The airline industry itself suffered a $19.6 billion loss of revenue between 2001 and 2002. But, of course, the greater cost has been the human cost to our brave service members, both men and women, who subsequently fought in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the global war on terrorism to ensure that another 9/11 never occurred. Today, that toll is 6,828 members killed in action, more than 16,000 wounded, including more than 1,500 amputees. Tragically, it's estimated over 5,000 veterans have taken their own lives since that day. This morning, as we meet here, there are perhaps thousands of observances underway across America, including many in our own region today. May we never forget the cost of freedom and all those who paid the ultimate price for it. In remembrance of those who have given their lives and in gratitude for all those who have served and continue to serve, both in the armed forces and the first responders, please join me in a moment of silence. Please join me in pledge of allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. A little emotional for me. I went through that myself. We'll then call on Andy Gunning and Joe Urban to come forward. Where's Joe? There he is.
As Joe's making his way up here, as you know, or for those of you that don't, Joe's going to be retiring as our AAA director October 1st, and really sad to see him go, but leaves us in really good shape here in the AAA. We've got some really outstanding programs that are recognized really across the state and in some across the nation. We've got an outstanding ombudsman program that provides support for residents in long-term care, a fantastic Medicare counseling support program, family caregiver support. So we're in really great shape, and Joe's 5 years roughly you've been here, really leave us in great shape. Over his long career, he's been involved in running independent living communities for seniors. He's worked in software development for assisted living operations, and he's run wellness programs. Joe's been involved with the State Commission on Aging and has really supported many local organizations here as well that provide senior services to our residents. So he really leaves a lasting impact on our residents and for our folks here at PPACG. So you're going to be missed. So we've got a farewell event coming up for Joe. Everybody's invited. We're going to blast out an invitation if it hasn't gone out already. I think some have gone out, but Monday, September 30th, here in this room from 4 to 6 p.m., we're going to say farewell and thank you to Joe, and we wish him the very best in retirement. So thank you.
Thanks.
Can you say anything? Sure.
I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here at the PPACG to serve the seniors of Colorado Springs for a couple decades, and in particular to finish out my career here. The leadership of Andy and this board and Commissioner Steen have been tremendous, and I see very, very bright things in the future of this organization and the AAA in general. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any other public comment? It's not on the agenda. Yes, ma'am. Deborah? For a few minutes.
Deborah Staubeininger, community advocate, citizen scientist. In addition to firefighting foam, we have massive amounts of contamination in our groundwaters as well as in our deep rock aquifers that is not being made public like it should be. And it does affect a lot of people, including our military installations, because of all of our military personnel who live in the civilian areas that are affected by this. This also includes chromium-6, which there was a study by a group that followed the EPA guidelines and found out that the chromium-6 is in both Fountain, Whitefield, and Security in amounts that California standards say are a health hazard, because chromium-6 can be very toxic. There's also other wastewater chemicals in the fracking, like the PFOAs and the PFOS, which by calculations of use amount for about 95% of the pollution that's out there. Unfortunately, that's also not made public, and that is still a real problem. Also, we have the wind turbines that, in my opinion, are dirty bombs waiting to go off, because they have those magnets that are 700 to 800 pounds that make up the part of the generator for the electricity. They are made up of two rare earth minerals. One is dysprosium, and it says fires cannot be put out by water. It can react with water to produce flammable hydrogen gas. And the other radioactive item in it is neodymium, and those are investigated as a mutagen. Now, we have a lot of people at the Vestas plant down in the south end of Pueblo, off of Highway 25. They have workers that are immigrants. They have workers that are temporary. And what I found out from researching with the people in those areas is that after 4 to 6 months of working on the nacelle, assemblies down there, and there's been a lot coming through, going south, coming north from there, and they get sick in the 4 to 6 months range. And they're not given radiation badges. They're not given materials or gloves, masks, or anything to keep them protected. And they're told to go home, and when they feel better to come back. But none of them are told of the potential of the radiation poisoning. And so they're not going to the doctors to get tested and to get medical care for radiation poisoning. So that is what I need to put out there for the public as well as for our military installations, because this, again, is not something that is publicized, but that is something that is very real, and that is something that's a fact. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there other public comment? Items not on the agenda. Seeing none, we'll go on to...
I would just like to state
Yes,
that
yes,
the
ma'am.
PFOA level in the city of Fountain Water is at non-detectable levels.
Thank you.
Those non-detectable levels, I'm sorry, non-detectable levels of parts per billion, and Fountain is not testing them for parts per trillion, like EPA has recommended.
Thank you. Well, on to consent items. Is there anybody who'd like to pull an item off for separate discussion? Seeing not, is there a motion to accept consent items as a block?
So moved.
Second?
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. That passes. Thank you. Action items 5A, I-25 PEL letter of support. Mr. Chuck Artato.
As Chuck makes his way up here, come on up. This is a request for a letter of support for the PEL study, which has just been wrapped up. A really good example of collaboration up and down the Front Range corridor, and something we probably ought to do more of, just given the population and economic growth that's going to knit our two regions together. So just a small portion of it is technically in our region, probably 80+% is in the DRCOG region in Boulder, or on Douglas County and further north, but we strongly recommend support of sending a letter of support, and hopefully can keep the efforts moving after the planning study and start seeing some additional improvements on I-25. So with that, Chuck.
Yep, thank you. Welcome.
Mr. Chair, Executive Director, members of the board, thank you for having me today. It's a great opportunity to be here and talk to you a little bit. I'll be very brief because I know you have a full agenda. Again, my name is Chuck Attardo. I work for CDOT. I'm the project manager for the Planning and Environmental Leakage Study. Okay, and that's different than the construction going on right now in the GAP. The GAP was a smaller piece of that. I'll get into that in a little bit. I come here today with for two reasons. First, I want to give you a very short, brief update on the recommendations coming out of the PEL, Planning and Environmental Linkage Study. And second, as the Executive Director said, I want to request a letter of support. The PEL, these PELs are non-binding documents. They're good, informed decision-making documents, but there's nothing in there that holds anybody to something. So letters of support from the communities, the governments, the towns, the cities that live along the corridor go a long way to showing that the PEL has strength. So let's jump into the recommendations. Real quick, we have a three-pronged package of recommendations. First, in the 34-mile corridor, and for those of you not familiar with the whole corridor, I did hand out the executive summary, which is hot off the press. It looks like this. It's 14 pages long. We just finished it last night, so you're really the first group to see it, okay? On page 1, it does show a good study area map of the corridor. It's a 34-mile corridor between Monument and Lone Tree, and the first prong, it really pertains to the transit. We need to have transit improvements in the corridor. More specifically, expansion of the CDOT's Bustang operations and things related to Bustang, like improvement of the Monument Park and Ride to accommodate faster trips in and out of there by Bustang, right? It also recommends a new station in Castle Rock for Bustang. So bus-type improvements. Rail as well. I think the Front Range rail passenger team's coming later today to talk to you, so I won't go into detail there. But we recommend a further development of the rail alignment and the service plan for passenger rail, okay, in the 25 corridor area. So transit's the first prong. The second prong is made up of these sort of smaller improvements, smaller bites out of the safety, travel reliability, and mobility problems in the corridor. They can be more easily budgeted and programmed, but they don't solve all those problems by themselves. What do I mean? Climbing lanes And I don't know if everybody's aware, but there was a climbing lane that was in the PEL as of 2 weeks ago between Greenland and the port of entry in the southbound direction. That now has actually been taken out of the PEL because folks like Karen Rowe and Commissioner Scott have found a way to fund that. So that's going to be part of the GAP construction. We took it out of the PEL, and it's going into the GAP construction. Something that's very much needed and very much supported by the Colorado Motor Carriers Association. So climbing lanes are part of these smaller improvements, auxiliary lanes, interchange improvements, and things like relocation of the port of entry and monument. That's also a recommendation of the PEL. And our primary location that we were looking at was the old Larkspur Rest Area, if people know where that is. So the third prong is you got to improve the I-25 mainline highway itself, too. Okay? And there's a couple things we want to do, and I'm not going to go into detail again. It talks a little bit more about that in this executive summary. But the first phase or initial phase of those improvements calls for extending those express lanes that are being built today as part of the GAP, okay, from Castle Rock all the way to Lone Tree. Okay, so now you have a 34 miles of a reliable trip. So that's the initial phase. It's not a cheap project. We're looking at about $900 to $1.2 billion, okay? So that is not currently funded. In order to get something like that going, there would have to be some sort of creative financing and possibly some private influx and ingenuity into the project. So that's what we're looking at right now, okay? So three-pronged approach, transit, smaller projects that we call supplemental elements, and improvements to the highway itself. Any questions on that?
Questions?
I know I went over it quick.
Yep,
Mr. Turner.
Once this study is approved,
what's the shelf life on
this study? I'm sorry? Once this project is approved, what is the shelf life of the study?
So in the guidance, in the Federal Highway Administration guidance, where that's the reason why we do these studies, it says 5 years. But that's sort of arbitrary. The study holds up as long as the agreements and the decisions hold up. You know, so if there are agreements and decisions in the study that everybody agrees with 5 years from now, guess what? They move forward. If there are things in there that say, somebody raises their hand and say, hey, I don't know if we agree to this, that's when you have to go back and revisit things.
Other questions from the board? Okay, let me...
So the real reason I'm here, Mr. Chair, is January 2017, we started the PEL. We had two things we wanted to do. We wanted to get an early action project. That became the GAP, okay? And we've been pretty dang successful in delivering that. The second thing we promised to all the stakeholders was to develop that mid- and long-term vision for the whole 34-mile corridor. The GAP's only 18 miles of it. It's half of it, okay? So we promised to develop the mid- and long-term vision. That's what the PEL is. We're getting ready to wrap that up by the end of this month. And I came here today because we would really love a letter of support. Mr. Chair, we'd like to put that letter of support on our website next to our PEL, along with all the other letters of support we collect. And it just, like I said, goes a long way of showing that people really are behind what we said.
We have drafted a letter, and let me just read through that, then we'll take questions and discussion. This is dated today, pending your approval. I-25 Springs Denver South Connection Planning Environmental Linkages PEL Study, addressed to Carrie Giacomo Wiedner. She's Region 1.
She's my boss.
Yep. There you go. Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments Board of Directors are pleased to support this letter of support, provide this letter of support to Interstate I-25 Colorado Springs Denver South Connection PEL study undertaken by the Colorado Department of Transportation for the I-25 corridor between the town of Monument, State Highway 105, and the CE 470 interchange. I-25 between 105 and C470 provides an essential travel link for residents, visitors, commuters, freight, and military personnel between the City of Colorado Springs and the City of Denver. The PL study has resulted in recommended solutions for the challenges affecting safety, travel time, reliability, and mobility. PPG looks forward to continuing communication, collaboration, and implementing transportation improvements in the I-25 corridor. That's the draft letter. Stan.
I'm sorry. Yes, thank you for let me ask this question. So in the words in there, you're obviously not asking for us to support the PEL, that this document is done. It's actually, are you asking us to support funding for this project? I mean, what is it specifically you're really looking for?
We're asking for the board to support the decisions, which are really the recommendations coming out of the PEL. Yeah.
So there is, I'm just looking at page 10, and perhaps you can help elaborate for me on the PEL.
Did anybody not get a copy of the executive summary? Yes, sir.
So as far as I can see anyway, but you can help elaborate because all of us have now looked at it a total of 5 minutes. I don't see 4 lanes in the gap. I only see keeping 2 general purpose lanes and 1 toll lane.
So the recommendation, I didn't go into the full recommendation. The initial recommendation is to extend the express lanes from Castle Rock to Lone Tree. The full recommendation actually recommends adding an additional lane from in each direction, Commissioner Williams, in each direction, from all the way from Monument to Lone Tree. Now, we're not defining the operations of that additional lane. It could be a general purpose lane. It could be another express lane. It could be something for autonomous vehicles, because we think that full recommendation is pretty far out in the future. We don't want to define it too much. Yeah, so there is another lane. There is another lane recommended.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Karen pointed out that dark purple, which was looking to me like the emergency lane.
Yes.
You're actually calling it an additional lane.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I just have to recommend that be a general purpose lane, not a managed lane. But I'm very appreciative of your recommendation to add another lane. So I do appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Turner and then Jill.
Okay, now,
Microphone.
none of this recommendation has anything to do with, I'm sorry. None of this recommendation has anything to do with rail?
Yes, sir. We did recommend further analysis of the rail alignment and service plan, and that's being taken up by this Front Range passenger rail team. We played with some alignments as part of the PEL, and we made some recommendations to them on what we learned. But they're really the group, this passenger rail team, that's really developing the alignment and the service plan.
Because in our letter of support,
Yep.
it doesn't mention that, so I wanted to make sure that our letter was aligned with what you're asking for in extending the express lanes, and that there wasn't anything in addition to that we needed to put in the letter.
You're right. The letter addresses I-25,
Okay,
not other means of mobility.
right. And that's all that is involved.
Well, I mean, we really want a letter of support to get support for all 3 parts of the recommendations. That's transit, the rail and bus, the I-25 mainline improvements, and the supplemental elements, these smaller things like climbing lanes and relocation of the port of entry. All of it is what we want a letter of support for. Yeah.
Perhaps by changing the letter from a letter of support for the I-25 to the I-25 corridor. Does that adequately address the scope?
I like that.
We can make that change, and then, if that's okay with the board, we haven't approved the letter yet, but we'll make that proposed change to the draft letter.
Thank you, Mr.
To
Chair.
the I-25 corridor.
Maybe add, the word modes of transportation or something. I don't know.
Others, Jill.
So Turner, as you might see on the agenda today, the Executive Director of Front Range Passenger Rail will be here as an informational item to kind of give you an update on the progress of that group. And I
Right.
serve on that board, so I'm really excited about their progress. And my question is just, my mic's on. I have to speak into it. Would it be helpful at all to have letters of support from other municipalities? Because I think Colorado Springs would be willing to do that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We're going to come back. You are the first group we've really asked,
Okay.
and that's because Chair Steen is very active in the project, and he said, Chuck, come down and ask for a letter. But we plan to go to Colorado Springs and Monument, Mayor Wilson. and Larkspur and Castle Rock and Lone Tree and Castle Pines, and then Douglas County and El Paso County, as well as Dr. Cog.
Great, okay, I look forward to that.
I just want to make sure that the letter hits all the targets.
Good point.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Okay, we will make that change to include the word corridor. Any other discussion? This is an action item. Is there a motion? It's a motion from...
With the changes?
With the changes to include
Then
corridor.
Then I'll second.
Turner? I think we have a second here. Any other discussion? All right. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. That passes. We'll make those changes and get that letter out to you later today.
Thank you, sir. No rush.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Action item 5B, Transportation Improvement Program Policy and Procedures. Catherine.
Good morning. I think there's a couple of you that didn't get this.
She's distributing the proposed change to what you received in your packet.
Thank you. Catherine Winger, Senior Transportation Planner. So over the last several months, staff has worked with TAC members to update our Transportation Improvement Program policies and procedures, or our short-range plan. So in the last month, we brought you the draft copy of those proposed changes, and we've also received some suggested edits to those from our CAC and from our board. And there is a one-page sheet that is proposed changes from the board here for additional edits to the item, or to the document that is at the link provided. And so the main updates on that list, on that one sheet that you have with highlights, is changing items from needs to be to shall, and just making it a little bit more official policies and procedures. So we appreciate those changes, and it doesn't change the main substance of the document. So we're bringing this to you for hopefully for final approval, so that we can move those policies procedures forward to this next tip cycle, which we'll be talking about in the information items.
Any discussion, questions for Catherine? This is the policy and procedure manual for how we adopt our TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, how documents are submitted, how they're approved, how reviewed, and for final approval by this board. Any questions? Is there a motion to approve the TIP as amended?
So moved.
Motion, is there a second? Second, discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. That passes. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
PPACG Board Bylaws Change 5C, action item.
Good morning, board members. Jessica McMullen, Policy and Communication Manager with Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments. As you saw back in May, as we brought up a variety of other things, that we had heard a request to consider doing a proxy voting member for governments who could not attend. So the Bylaws Committee met and discussed this. So I'm going to pass it over to Andy to talk a little bit more about that request.
Sure. It really was initiated by the City of Cripple Creek. They acknowledge that they've got a pretty busy council where they work full-time, mayor and council members, and really can't come down for a meeting given the driving distance and back and forth. So they made a request a couple months ago for the board to consider allowing a senior staff member to sit in during board meetings and actually to participate and vote as well. So we took it up. There were a couple of conversations with our subcommittee of the PPACG board. Commissioner Williams and Councilmember Thompson drilled into this and made a recommendation after a lot of deliberation to suggest that jurisdictions outside of the MPO urbanized boundary area, so further out away from City of Colorado Springs, could send a senior staff member to participate but actually not vote during the board deliberations. I did a little bit of research into this as well. The city manager from Cripple Creek that made the request suggested that when he was involved in the Northwest Council of Governments, when he was with another jurisdiction up in Northwest Colorado, said that the Northwest COG would allow senior staff members to sit in and actually vote on items that came up. Checked in with the Northwest COG, and really kind of came to the conclusion that we're different than they are. We're, as an MPO and a AAA, we're giving out a lot of money through transportation and our aging programs, and that's really a responsibility of elected officials. We also get a lot more involved in policy discussions with legislative policy issues and things of that nature. We've been getting much more active in creating our legislative priorities for the region. And again, that's really something that it's not a staff responsibility, it's more of an elected official responsibility. So we're different than that other COG in some different ways. So I explained that to the folks at Cripple Creek, and they understood that might be a bit of a bridge too far to actually be voting alongside elected officials at this point. But the recommendation was to allow them to participate, especially if you're outside the urbanized area, not one of the MPO jurisdictions. That would be Cripple Creek, Town of Victor, Town of Alma, Town of Fairplay, Rama, and Calhoun. If you felt that you couldn't keep coming to meetings and had a hard time finding a representative, the town clerk could participate. So basically, those 6 jurisdictions. But also, we talked about how we've had pretty good active involvement by 12 of the 16 jurisdictions. Palmer Lake's been involved much more recently here pretty actively. Town of Victor, although they couldn't be here today. But we've had 12 out of our 16-member jurisdictions pretty actively participating. So it's really just the 4 that haven't been able to weigh in. So it's complicated, a little bit of a slippery slope when you start opening that door a little bit. But hopefully I've summarized the recommendation.
Holly or Sharon, you want to comment?
Yeah, so they would be allowed to come sit up at the table with us and have like a name tag. But then when it came to voting, they would not be able to participate in the votes. But they would be able to share their input that their cities might have from a different perspective than we might have down here. And hopefully they would take that information back and get their council members and mayors so excited that they would think it would be really valuable to be attending, and also stress that we do have the call-in option, so that if they did think there was something they needed to vote on as an elected official, then maybe they could kind of tune them into the meeting when they needed to call in to vote. So so they will not be voting members. They've made that very clear, and they understand that. But they would like the ability to have a staff member sit at the table and just participate with the discussions with us.
Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I would just like to, I don't have a problem with, having a representative be a non-voting participant in the meetings. I think that's great. I just want to reemphasize, we do have technology that allows elected officials to dial in, and I think that makes an enormous amount of sense. I am interested in their participation and their vote on this board, and I can empathize with the difficulty of trying to come all the way out here, especially if you have a full-time job. But they are elected officials. If they could be dialing in, listening to the meeting, have the context of the conversation, and then vote, I just would highly encourage that. It's up to them, but I would highly encourage that they do that. It has been very effective on other boards that I've been on the occasional time when you've been unable to be physically present at the meeting. So I would hope that they would do that, and then they can do that from their current location, from their business, in a back room where it's quiet, whatever it is, and hopefully that they would be able to participate more. So I would encourage that.
Yeah. And I would just note that option is proposed by this amendment is to members outside the MPO, outside the metro area. So El Paso could not delegate to an admin. You guys are stuck, as proposed.
I think that's a fair addition to that.
Okay. Tyler.
I support this, and I think that it is difficult for the voluntary elected officials to find the time to participate. I think it's unique when you can find that, and I think ways to facilitate that, both through technology as well as encouragement, are very important for us to embrace and figure out how we can figure that out. And I think to the technology side, making sure that we can hear the audio on the overhead audio with the technology in this room is critical, as well as streaming the video, so that if there is a presentation that can be seen simultaneously, and those need to be addressed immediately, so that the Obviously, position number one needs to be here present so you can make eye contact and have fruitful discussions with your colleagues. But in lieu of that, if there's extenuating circumstances, I think that it is important to provide those opportunities. And if I recall correctly, our bylaws are worded in such a way to say in not extreme, but unusual circumstances should people be able to participate in other ways than physically present. And I think that that is important to emphasize so that there is that flexibility, but it does encourage people through the wording there to be present whenever possible. Additionally, I would discourage the use of the MPO, but rather flip that to unpaid elected officials, because I don't really care whether or not it's a geography. If you're an elected official and you have responsibilities elsewhere or can't be present, I think that that is much more important than the geography therein. I don't think it's the travel time necessarily as the seat time and being able to be here, so I think that the MPO boundary issue is I don't think as important as whether or not that's a paid elected official position or not.
Well, okay. We do have an extract of the bylaws in your packet. It's page 30 of the packet. It's actually the back side of the second page. Let me just read quickly. It's section B, Bravo 1. This is under the non-voting membership section. The proposed language is appointed administrative representative, a member jurisdiction may, outside of the MPO, may, by resolution of its governing body and subject to the approval of the executive committee, that's the members at this head table, appoint a senior administrative official in lieu of an elected official to be the designated representative to the council, and then other minor changes throughout. Other questions, comments, discussion? All right, we have. Yes, go ahead, Stan.
Yes, I'll just offer a point there. The word "in lieu" sounds like an individual will be replacing the elected official, and I'm not sure how wise that is. I mean, if they want to send a representative to be physically present, but then still have the option for the elected official to dial in at the same time, I think that would be wise. So, to me, it's not in lieu of, it's maybe in addition to. And then they have the options of both, but one option means they don't vote. However, they have someone present to understand what's going on in the proceedings. The other option, they can vote. So I recommend removing maybe in lieu. I don't know if it needs the replacement or not.
So the language is a senior administrative official in lieu of an elected official. You'd like to make that in
addition.
In addition to. In addition to. In lieu of would read instead in addition to an elected official. Amendment to the proposed motion. Discussion. Is there a motion?
Move to approve the, I lost where I was at. Move to approve the bylaw change as amended.
With the words addition to.
Oh, well, that was as amended, yeah. Okay.
As amended, okay.
Okay.
Is there a second? All right, discussion. All those in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Seeing none, that passes. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. Okay, that concludes our action items. Information items. Item 6A, Front Range Passenger Rail Study. I don't see Randy, Mr. Gradinger. He was the executive director. Pardon me? We can come back?
Yeah.
I told him not to be here till about 10. We've been rocking and rolling.
Yeah, right, like I said. We're on it this morning. Okay. Move on to information on 6B, 2021-2024 tip schedule and allocation. Catherine and John.
We've been watching WWF, so we're going to tag team this.
Okay. That'll be interesting.
Okay. Catherine Wenger, Senior Transportation Planner. This item is to discuss the new 2021-2024 tip schedule and allocations. And so we're starting a new tip cycle. And so before that, John was going to go over what the tip is in general so that you have an idea of what we're going to get started on for the new cycle. So, take it away.
So at the last month's meeting, we had done a presentation on the long-range plan, and as we were doing that, we realized that there was a lot of folks around the room that have not been through a transportation planning process before. So we wanted to make sure that we went back and sort of covered the basics, for lack of a better term, make sure that everyone's sort of on the same page. So I put together this, and actually it's some pretty crude, rudimentary graphics, but I'm a visual person, so I tried to put it in where I could. I want to thank Wendy Pettit from CDOT for helping me out with this. In fact, Wendy, you probably should be here with us, but apparently 3 members of a tag team require some sort of cage. So, but feel free to chime in. So we're going to kind of cover, what is the TIP, what projects need to be listed in it, where does it fall in the whole big process of actually coming up with an idea for a project and then actually getting that project built and finding that funding. The Metropolitan Planning Organization has the Transportation Improvement Program, and then again, if you're, and I'll explain this in a minute, but if you're in this other area, outside the MPO, you fall within a TPR, Transportation Planning region, and then you would be in the CDOT STIP, and then again, that process, how does it work, how do you get in, and then I have a little graphic for the way I think of how that flows. So real quickly, I went into the federal regs because I always like to give folks the federal regulations to make sure that everyone knows I'm not just making this stuff up. But the STIP is, again, it's a prioritized projects statewide of 4 years that consists of projects that are consistent with the state long-range plan. And you all have been hearing about the state long-range plan recently. It also incorporates our metropolitan plans, so they roll up and are incorporated by reference. And it is required to be fiscally constrained. And every time I use the word fiscally constrained, Brandy, I saw Brandy, but Brandy might have stepped out. She's like, what does that exactly mean? That just means what you have to do is figure out how much money you believe you have available and make sure that your projects do not exceed that amount. And the reason for that is we've had regions in the past in other parts of the country that were in non-attainment for air quality, and the Fed said, well, how are you going to get out of non-attainment for air quality? And they said, look at all these projects we're going to do. These are going to be great. But they didn't have the money to actually deliver them. So the Feds got wise to that and said, okay, from now on you can only promise to the public things that you can actually deliver. So that was my 2-minute sidetrack on fiscal constraint. And the TIP is just, again, the metropolitan version of that or for what's in the urbanized area. So the TIP, what projects need to be listed according to the federal requirements? They need to be regionally significant projects. So that means that they either have a federal funding source or regardless of funding source, even if it's a private developer, if it's on a federal aid facility such as I-25. So all that work that we're doing with I-25 and that Briargate extension, because it's connecting to an interstate, regardless of where the funding source is, even though it's a private developer, has to be listed in the TIP for the feds to allow access. So, and within that, we have to list the description. We have to be very specific as to the phase, is it construction, is it design, and the limits giving the roadway from point A to point B, or what exactly the work is. Again, that's to be transparent to the public to make sure people know what they're getting. Estimated total project cost, the amount of federal funds that are included in it. And again, this is something that Wendy helped me out with. Sometimes you also have ADA and air quality requirements that need to be contained in there as well. Our TIP is updated every 2 years, and it has to be on the same schedule as the statewide TIP. So right now, Catherine, oh, there she is getting ready to come to you and talk about how we're going to kick this cycle off. And our intent is that it should line up nicely with the CDOT process, which means we won't come back to you to do it again for another 2 years. However, if the CDOT process gets stalled, we might be back again next year to make sure that we align and that we are on the same cycle as CDOT. This is, again, one of my graphics because I'm a visual person. So we have studies and plans that the either the jurisdictions do or we can do regionally that identify projects, and even CDOT does these studies, that identifies a project. So, hey, we've got this idea, these are the things that we want to do. The next step in getting in there is to become included in a long-range plan or be consistent with a long-range plan. So again, that's either the PPACG long-range plan that we're doing now, the 2045, and Catherine actually talked to you about that last month, and then she'll talk to you again about this month too as well as then for the state, the STIP, you have all the folks coming out with the Let's Move Colorado, is that the name of it? The statewide plan? Anyway, that's been out as well. So you have to be included in that long-range plan before you can be in the TIP or the STIP. Again, the TIP is the NPO version, the STIP is the statewide version. Once you're in the TIP, only the projects in the first year actually have real money associated with them. If you're in the first year of the TIP, that means you can then go through the process to do the plan specifications and estimates to make sure that your project then takes the money from this big general PPACG account, for lack of a better term, grabs that out, and then puts it into a project-specific account. Once it's in a project-specific account, then you can actually start with your project, which is design activities and construction, and then ultimately project implementation. So again, think of the 4-year TIP document, sort of the years 2 through 4 being that on-deck circle, you're getting ready. When it comes into the first year, that's when you actually have something that you can print out and attach to your PS&E package to get funding. Again, this is trying to go back to the conversation before that if you're in an NPO area, so we're Pikes Peak area, this is our NPO area, that's TPR number 1. And then and then everything else within our COG is within the Central Front Range. So if you're in that little sort of yellowish area, that's the MPO, so you would be in the TIP. If you're in that darker blue area, that's Central Front Range, and then you would, Wendy would be your best friend, and you would be in the STIP. And then I have this over there to sort of show that all of this is within Region 2. Karen Rowe as recommendation authority on the funding all within that area. So she's got a very big area, and the funding that she's got to make sure it gets programmed. So again, this is just that area blown up, and I think I'm kind of already over my time, so I'm just going to skip that. How the projects get in. Again, so because they're federal dollars, they must be federally aid eligible. So you can't do a local street. You can't do somebody's driveway. It has to be collector or above in classification to make sure that it's eligible. There is an exception for off-system bridge because bridges are important. So there's funding that's set aside to do bridges. As I've said before, it must be consistent with the long-range plan. Funding has eligibility requirements, so you must meet those requirements. You cannot use transit funding, for example, on a roadway project, and you can't use sidewalk money that's specifically for sidewalks on transit. So you have to make sure you meet the eligibility requirements. Jurisdictions must be able to provide the required match. Depending on the funding type, it's either 17.1, thanks. Wendy's like giving me signals. 17.1 for most federal, or for some other things it's 80-20, and plus we have some other things that are 50-50. And then there are performance measures that have to be shown for those projects. Again, the regional prioritization process is developed by authority, so everything that's in the TIP is you folks here at the PPACG board, and the STIP is the Colorado State Transportation Commission. And I think this is my last graphic, and again, I'm a visual person, this is my way of summarizing. FTA has transit dollars, state of Colorado through legislative action has state funds available for different things, both transit and roadway. And then FHWA has federal funds available, STP, Metro, Congestion Mitigation, Air Quality, or CMAQ, and then TAP funds. CDOT, as you can see, sort of gets all of those funds in one form or another. Our partner, Mountain Metro, is a designated recipient for our area, so they get some of the state transit funds as well as the federal transit funds for their programming. And then here at Pikes Peak, through our TAC committee, we look at these other federal dollars. So after these agencies have our process, which Catherine will go into here in a second for the MPO, but basically the process is there's notice, we tell how much money is available and what the eligibility requirements are. The jurisdictions put together an application, they submit it. We take those applications, we give it back to the committees for them to review and prioritize to come up with a recommendation. That recommendation then ultimately comes to you here at the board for your adoption within the document, which is the programming. Very similar for the TPR, except again, Karen has a lot more autonomy and control over those funds when she makes a recommendation to the State Transportation Commission. And finally, as I had said before, as it works its way to our TIP, it's incorporated by reference into the state STIP, which is what the feds look at. So that, in a nutshell, very, very big nutshell, is that overall TIP process. Just to give you a little background of when we talk about these things, what we're trying to discuss and how it is ultimately the vehicle that provides funding. Plans are good, but that's only a plan to sort of identify what we might do when we have the funding based on current conditions. The program actually provides the funding and makes the dollars available in that first year. So with that, I'll take any questions, but Catherine, get ready.
Questions? Holly?
Can you email that excellent PowerPoint presentation with great visuals to us so we can blow them up and put it on our wall?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Other comments around the table? Catherine?
All right. So thank you, John. So as you mentioned, we're in the process of starting this new federal transportation improvement program. So the current one we have is 2019 through 2022, and the new one we're going to go into is 21 through 24. So the first 2 years of the current one will roll into the new one, and then we're going to be doing a call for projects for the second 2 years of that TIP. So we already have some projects programmed for the 2019 and 2020, so we're going to, 21 and 22, and so we're going to do a call for projects for 23 and 24. And so what's included in this memo is an outline of the programming allocation and the schedule for that call for projects to update the TIP and to create a new one. So you'll see that in 21 and 22, it says it's already programmed. There's similar funding dollars in those that you see in 23 and 24. And those numbers are the estimates that John alluded to for that we come up with estimates based on what we previously have received from the feds. And we do a little bit of inflation for that, but not much. And so we program based on estimates. But we cannot guarantee that those projects will get those monies, but they usually do. So that's what you see in 23 and 24. And then we have the schedule overview. We're starting right now. We've released the application documents. The call for projects will open. We'll have a workshop next week. And then once they're due, we'll have a project prioritization workshop for those 2 years based on TAC members' applications and the priorities of each of the member jurisdictions. And then starting in about November, you'll start seeing documents and approvals for going out to public comment period and then moving into the final committee review and hopefully approval.
Additional questions, comments? Complicated, but really very important. You may note that from time to time, CDOT may even request permission from this board to add an item to the TIP. The TIP is a component of the STIP. So this board has federal authority under the delegation of the Metropolitan Planning Organization for expenditure of federal dollars. Questions? This is an information item. If you really want to learn more, you want the graduate level, come next Monday, September 18th, a week from today at 9 a.m. We'll talk more. Any other questions, comments? Catherine, anything else? Thank you. Excellent. We'll return now to item 6A. Jill.
I can't see him, but
right, he's behind.
I've been told he's behind the pillar. I am just going to introduce Randy Grauberger. He is the director of the Southwest Chief and Front Range Passenger Rail Commission. I currently have the fortune of serving as chair of that commission, and we hired Randy only a few short months ago, and he has just been really rocking and rolling and moving out fast, and he is going to share with us the events that have taken place over the last few months and what is expected to come in the near future. Go ahead. Thanks, Randy, for being here.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if I'm driving this show.
You're driving.
Where's the-
Yeah, we're not driving. We're on a on a
keyboard.
train.
Down there.
Okay, I'll get the keyboard up there. I wish there had been a train to come down to Colorado Springs this morning. It takes about 45 minutes to get out of downtown Denver. That's a little frustrating. But anyway, I thank you for inviting me. This is a presentation that we've been providing to folks up and down the Front Range, all the way from Fort Collins to Trinidad over the last few months, and it's starting to evolve as we've now got our consultant on board, and the project is finally really ready to get going. The commission was created back in 2017. It replaced the previous Southwest Chief Commission. That commission had been put together by the legislature to work with the neighboring states of Kansas and New Mexico to essentially save the Southwest Chief Amtrak train that goes from Chicago to Los Angeles by way of southeastern Colorado. This commission basically the new commission is charged with basically keeping the same activities that the previous commission did, but certainly adding the impetus of implementing Front Range passenger service between Pueblo and Fort Collins. The commission is housed under CDOT. As Jill said, I was hired back in February. I left the consulting business that I'd been in for the last 14 years. But previously I had been with CDOT for 28 and a half years, was a branch manager in the planning division when I retired. So once again, I'm a CDOT employee, but I don't really report to CDOT. I report to Jill and the other 10 commissioners. There are 11 voting commissioners. 5 are appointed by the governor. The 2 Class 1 railroads are members of this commission, and I think that's really important because a lot of times if you start a project and try to bring the BNSF or UP in later, you might have a little bit of a challenge. But they're both voting members right now and are on board from the start of this project. We also have 2 advocates for passenger rail, a resident of the Southwest Chief communities and counties in the southern part of the state, and then each of the MPOs are represented. North Front Range, Dr. Cog, Jill represents your organization, and Terry Hart from Pueblo Area Council of Governments. And lastly, we have the Representative Bill Van Meter, who heads up the planning group at RTD. He is also a voting member. Then we have 3 non-voting members. David Krutzinger with CDOT is the non-voting member. Amtrak and the director of the the Cheyenne Chamber up in Cheyenne is also a non-voting member of the commission. These are the actual names and titles of the commissioners. Again, this is a great group of people to work for. Commission's responsibilities, again, are to continue to work to preserve Amtrak Southwest Chief service across southeastern Colorado. On the map at the right, you can see in the orange line, that orange line coming in from Kansas, comes into La Junta currently, down to Trinidad, and then on down to over Raton Pass, Albuquerque, and on into Los Angeles. As you can see, there's some dashed lines on the orange that connect up to Pueblo and actually to Colorado Springs now, and then on down to Walsenburg. The second task of the commission is to consider rerouting the Southwest Chief service between La Junta and Trinidad by way of Pueblo and Walsenburg. That was in the statute. But since the statute in the last year or so, we've also started having discussions with Amtrak and BNSF about the possibility of extending a through-car service into Pueblo and now up to Colorado Springs. That would be daily service, one way from La Junta, the westbound train. That would break off a car with a locomotive in La Junta. That would come on into Pueblo and up to the Springs, and then the next day that train would return back out to La Junta to connect with eastbound Chief going on to Chicago. And lastly, and probably the more visible element of the Commission's charge, is to facilitate the development of front-range passenger rail service. This slide basically just shows some of the, in fact, let me focus first on the blue line in the middle. CDOT did a EIS update back in 2014. The North I-25 Environmental Impact Statement had a commuter rail element in it back in 2009. We updated that in 2014 for CDOT, and that line came down from the South Harmony Max BRT, it's called, that station in Fort Collins at the south end of the metro area. It came down the BNSF line into central Longmont on new construction along State Highway 119 out to I-25, and then down the I-25 corridor to where it would tie into RTD's North Metro line. From Denver south, that really has never been studied for passenger service on the existing Class 1 rights-of-way. So what David Krutzinger did was he basically just did a pro rata share of the amount of time and dollars that it would take for those previous services that were evaluated up north, and the price tag for that type of a service was estimated to be about $5 billion. The line on the right is a high-speed rail interregional connectivity study. That was done in 2012. It looked at 180-mile-an-hour trains within the I-25 right-of-way from Fort Collins to E-470, and then it followed E-470 all the way around the metro area until it hit I-25 again, and then back into the I-25 right-of-way to Pueblo. That price tag was $15.3 billion. On the left is the Mustang service that CDOT has implemented over the last few years. That's been successful beyond the Commission's, I think, the wildest dreams, the Transportation Commission's dreams. And it, in fact, is they're adding service now. They're looking at extending that service down to Pueblo in the near future. But as you can see, they've spent about $200 million. Is that $200 million? Yeah, $200 million now over the 3 or 4 years that service has been in operation. We have selected our consultant finally. That process began in May, and HDR, the prime on that team, was given a notice to proceed in the last week of August. So we've already had a lot of various committee meetings in getting this project started, but they have a lot of recognizable sub-consultants on that team that you can certainly recognize as well. So we're anxious to really get this project underway. One of the things that the consultant team will be doing is the development of a passenger rail service development plan. This is a document that the Federal Railroad Administration requires in order for the state to ever receive any federal funding from FRA on this project. It'll look at the alignments, the speed, the technology that will be used. It'll identify operating and construction costs. It'll look at ridership, revenue, and also identify, at the end of the day, who would be the operator. Amtrak has indicated they would be interested in being an operator. BNSF operates these kinds of trains in the Chicago area. And then there's also an opportunity for private operators such as Herzog. They operate the Rail Runner train. That's the train in New Mexico that you might have seen running down the I-25 right-of-way from Santa Fe on into Albuquerque. This will also, in our effort, when Shoshana Liu came on board as director of the department, she said we might as well go ahead and do the NEPA work in regard to this project as well. We expect that to begin in earnest in next spring. We're starting some of the pre-NEPA activities now in terms of developing purpose and need and some of the other preliminary preferred alternative alignments and starting to take advantage of some of the environmental work that CDOT has already done in the I-25 corridor, both north and south of Denver. So we're utilizing a lot of the staff of Karen's staff in Region 2, the Region 1 staff in the metro area, and Region 4 CDOT staff up north. Stakeholder engagement effort is underway. We've already had several meetings of the project management team. We're meeting actually weekly right now until we get the project underway. We're in the process of forming a technical working group. The consultant has the concept of developing north, south, and central stakeholder coalitions. So we're starting to interview some folks up and down the corridor to identify participants both at the north, south, and central level. On the south, obviously Colorado Springs would be in the south. We're still having conversations about where do we draw that boundary. Should it be Castle Rock? Should it be the top of Monument Hill and the Douglas-El Paso County line? So that determination hasn't been made yet, but we're anticipating that the first meetings of these segment coalition groups will be probably in the first week of November. Then we'll roll those up into a corridor coalition meeting where we'll have some representatives from each of those three segment coalitions meet together, and that group is anticipated to get together for the first time probably in December of 2019. Then there'll be a project leadership committee. This will actually include the governor's office and all of the federal agencies that might be involved. We haven't identified a lead federal agency yet. There's possibilities that it could be FRA, because certainly we'll have some options of including the Class 1 railroad rights-of-way in this project. It could be FHWA if I-25 corridor is involved. And obviously, when it gets into the Denver metro area, we'll probably be piggybacking over the top of RTD's network, which was primarily built with FTA funds. So it could be any of those agencies could be the lead, or it could be a combination of them. And then again, we'll have a rail industry roundtable, obviously, with Class 1 railroads being on the commission. We'll be having very early engagement with them individually, but there'll probably be opportunities throughout the course of the study to bring the railroads in together. And then Amtrak certainly would be part of that as well. We are having some initial conversations with some of CDOT's legislative staff in terms of what might the commission be able to take to the legislature as soon as 2020 legislative session. Obviously, there's the possibility to look at what kind of a district are we going to create. Will this be just the counties up and down the Front Range corridor that would have options to have stations within the corridor? Will it be smaller than that? Will it be larger than that? Those are things that are currently being discussed. Then obviously, we'll have some conversations about future funding. I don't think we're going to be ready in terms of the consultant study yet to identify funding for the overall project. Again, that's going to be a big number, but the commission would certainly be in position to get some additional funding. The commission was provided $2.5 million back in 2018 from the legislature. That funded the consultant effort that's going on now. My salary, an assistant that we've been able to hire for me, that salary, and then some match for some of these federal grants. But that money will be running out before too long, so we may be going back to the legislature for an ask from the commission for some more staff and consultant service funding in this next session. Upcoming activities, the commission meets monthly. Our next meeting is this Wednesday in Denver. We started in April actually having meetings, every other meeting up and down the Front Range, and the April meeting was in this room. We said since Jill was chair, she got first choice on having the first out of Denver meeting. When I was interviewed for my position, I suggested to the panel, I said, you know what, you folks are called the Front Range Passenger Rail Commission. I think you should quit having all your meetings in Denver. And they took that to heart. And we've since had meetings in Fort Collins. Pueblo was the meeting in August, and we actually had a great turnout. There were like 70 people from the general public that showed up at that meeting. So we're now having to use CDOT's big meeting room and auditorium now for our meetings, just because of the local support and the public support that this project is getting. The October 11th meeting will be up in Loveland. And again, we're going to have the stakeholder engagement activities underway here pretty soon as we kick off the service development plan and environmental impact study work. The commission put a survey out online back in mid-July. This is the link to that. I do have a few little cards that I can circulate around to this group too, in terms of of getting folks to respond to this survey, but we just kind of wanted to find out where people were at in terms of is there public support for this project. These are the results through last Friday. We've had over 3,600 responses. I was told this morning before I left that that's up over 4,000 now. But the numbers are quite shocking, actually. Do you support establishing front-range passenger rail between Fort Collins and Pueblo? Almost 92% of the people that are responding to this survey are saying that. Do you believe passenger rail service could help address transportation needs along the Front Range? Again, over 90%. We're going to get into, and this survey is going to be online through the end of September, and then eventually in the next few months we'll start loading up a different version of this that gets into a little more specificity. We'll probably ask, is reliability of service more important to you and reliability of travel time, or is super fast? You know, are people interested in the 180 mile an hour, or is 90 mile an hour more than competitive enough to compete with I-25 and the congestion that we're seeing now? So please, I'm going to circulate these here before I leave. We'll pass those around the table and let everybody, if you haven't filled this out, I don't know if the computers are smart enough to make sure that you can't vote more than once. A lot of people said they do that in Chicago, I've heard, but I don't know if we do that in Colorado. But again, we're very pleased with these numbers. I felt when we put this service out, the survey out, if we were getting 70% in favor of this project, I would have been pretty excited about it. But when I told Jill the first numbers were 90%, she was almost speechless, I think. That's the end of my presentation today. Do we have any questions? I'd be glad to answer any that I can, or Jill would answer some as well.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for you. For the survey, those are pretty astounding numbers, but I want to ask, how was the survey asked? In other words, was it without resource considerations, or was it with resource considerations? Because sometimes people will go, we're offering A, B, and C. Love it, love it, love it. Oh, but that'll cost you X. And they're like, oh, not so much anymore.
Absolutely. And we did not include any dollars in this. We didn't say, oh, by the way, do you realize you may have to dig into your pocket a little bit and pay for this in some fashion? No, that was not part of this survey. But that certainly will be as we update those costs and as the service development plan identifies what costs might be forthcoming down the road if this were to become an actual project.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Others? Yes. I'm sorry,
Jill.
Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Remember, turned on this time.
Yeah, thank you.
The surveys that you have gotten back, which items, I know I took mine, and some of the things that were on there were, like you say, were various things. One of the things I remember on there was safety and things. What was hitting the top of the list? And because I remember it asked you to rank things in the order. I think it was like 6 things. What went to the top and so forth. But what was hitting the top of the list on those? Do you happen to know?
I do. The number one reason that people would choose passenger rail is dependability of the travel time. They know that when they hop on I-25, they might make it to Denver in an hour and 10 minutes, or it might be 2 hours and 10 minutes like it was this morning. Trains, you can almost set your clock on these kinds of commuter trains all across the country. Now, when you're looking at Amtrak, when they start in Chicago and have to go all the way to L.A., those trains can run an hour late, 2 hours late, but we're not talking that type of service. We're talking service that you can almost set your watch by. So that's the most important thing, according to most people. The second most is just they want some travel options. Right now, I-25 or Mustang is their only option, and they just believe that with congestion, over the next 25 years, there's some analysis out there that's saying peak hour travel time on I-25 could almost double in the next 20 years. I don't think people are looking forward to that. So I think they would like to have the option of either going to Denver, Fort Collins, or down to Pueblo, in a dependable amount of time.
Other questions? Comments, Joe? Anything? I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry, pardon me.
I'm too close.
Peripheral vision.
Jill, I would encourage you to talk with Kimberly Hoge, I'm not sure if that's how you say her last name, from the VA about the difficulties they're having in getting their veterans up to Aurora for appointments, especially early morning appointments. And obviously, we would have to handle the part about how they get to the train, but having it go all the way to that area and having a place to get off is going to be very, very important to the population that
Have they
needs to
looked
get up there.
into busing at all?
They have. That was one of the options we looked at yesterday. But long-term, as you're doing this, I think it might be a good idea to maybe have a conversation with her about where are your veterans coming from, what are the ones that are having the most difficulty getting up to Denver for their appointments, and that kind of information, because she's got a lot of pretty far outlying
Yeah,
people
I
that
can
need to
connect
get
with
up
Cam
there.
Hoagie or Keith, her transit
And I think
manager.
bringing in all of the military voices, I think, is going to be a really big key to this, because reliability is important for them, too, so.
Other comments, questions?
We'll add, we are having a meeting tomorrow. Amtrak is, again, member of the commission, so they're coming in for the meeting on Friday, but we're meeting with them at 3 o'clock tomorrow to talk about not only Amtrak's future national reauthorization plans, but also more detail about this through car from La Junta into Pueblo and Colorado Springs. Back in 2016, Amtrak did some ridership analysis and found that there would be enough people just using the service to add that car, and it would be profitable, actually, for Amtrak to do that just into Pueblo. And then this past spring, we said, well, if it's going to work and it's profitable into Pueblo, why don't you run the numbers on ridership if you add Colorado Springs into that? And they haven't ran those numbers yet, but they said with the military involvement, the tourism influence of Colorado Springs, they said, you know, it's just a no-brainer to add Colorado Springs to that through car. So we actually have also just, the commission is going to pay a contractor some funds to get a CRISI grant. That's a federal grant that's going to be available to actually study that whole Pueblo to Colorado Springs effort. And we just signed the notice to proceed on that yesterday. It's a real short turnaround. The grant applications for those planning funds have to be into USDOT by October 18th. So we'll spend a lot of time and like they say, sleep fast. We're going to have to go real hard to get that application done, but the commission is taking that on too here in the next 4 weeks.
Randy, what's on the out years as we go to full scale, what's the capacity they expect to carry between the Springs and Denver? Number of cars or number of passengers? Any thought?
Norm, that will all be rolling out in the next few months, and as we develop that service development
Cool thing
plan.
about rail is you just add a car, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Scalable.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, one locomotive is powerful enough. And I've had people say, well, will it be hard for those passenger trains to get up over Monument Hill? Because the coal trains are only going 99 miles an hour when they crest. And I said, those coal trains are a little heavier than these passenger trains. So, no, the BNSF also just recently told us that for the past few years they'd been saying that 79 miles an hour would be a maximum if you operated within their rights-of-way. Now they've increased that up to 90. So that really becomes that much more competitive, with that thing we call I-25 out there. So.
Yeah. Well, thanks for keeping us in the loop. We'll be very engaged, and thanks for your
And
trip.
we'll continue to provide updates whenever you want.
Very good. And by the way, Randy has briefed the stack a number of times, and I think we'll continue to stay engaged there, too.
Continue to do that, too.
Yep. Turner?
Just one more thought I just had. If, and I don't know where all this lies, but if the BNSF were to haul less coal, and I don't know that, because you hear about things happening and this and that, and I don't know where all this will go, but and more rail is available, that would open more rail usage up for passenger service.
Well, would you care to speak to that?
I will, yes. The railroads have said that with Colorado's projected growth of another 3 million people in the Front Range, any reduction in coal traffic that they have will be offset with just mixed freight servicing that population. So while, in fact, I think everybody is projecting that the unit coal train traffic will be going down, it won't go down so much that, we'll be able to just say, well, no more freight out here. We're going to just put passengers, on these old freight lines. What we're anticipating is that, in fact, there is still going to be 20-plus probably freight trains a day, in this corridor. That's not going to go away, and it's not going to probably diminish significantly below that. But the Class I railroads have said, we're not going to operate on those same tracks, but we would build another 2 sets of tracks that would be just for the passengers, but they would be in that corridor. In most cases, from Pueblo to Denver, you've got already 2 tracks. Now, from Monument Hill to Fountain, they took the second track out back in the late 70s. So that's just single track right now with a few passing sidings. So there will have to be some additional capacity added, within El Paso County and, through this area to accommodate, future passenger rail service. But they wouldn't be operating on the same tracks, as the actual freight trains themselves.
Let me link the last agenda item with this one. Andy or John, how does the long-range transportation plan develop for 2045 include rail? What does it look like?
To John. Come on up.
Briefly.
Yeah.
Well, at this point, hopefully everyone can hear me. I'll use my projection voice. This is a study that had not started while we were doing the bulk of the work for the 2045, which has been over the last 4 years. So there'll just be cursory language in there, but none of the results of this would be included in the 2045. This is, again, why we update the 2045 with a long-range plan every 4 years or so. So it will definitely be included in the next one and be a much larger component, because we'll actually have that data from those studies to include.
Okay. Rocky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Randy, what are you looking at issues of last mile? Obviously, the success of rail is going to have a lot to do with whether people actually can get to the rail.
Absolutely.
And we started a new committee on the commission that we're calling Mobility Systems, saying at the end of the day, the objective isn't a particular mode of transportation, it's just mobility, of which this would clearly be a very important part. But if you look at technology, if you look at the constraints and available right-of-way, we all know that roads are going to take care of everything going forward. But it also speaks to, I think, the need for a systems approach from day one on how you optimize an integrated mobility system, how you connect rail to light rail to roads and the like. Are you undertaking that side of the problem as well?
Absolutely. The service development plan will be looking at all station locations and access to those locations. Jill always brings this up. She says these things, this passenger rail network will only be as successful as the station development and as the connections and the who knows what the various alternatives to, might be Uber, it might be self-driving cars, who knows, but all kinds of connections, and that is certainly is part of the service development plan, is the interconnectivity of all the transportation network. That's why I'm glad we've got all 4 of the MPOs as members of this commission as well, because North Front Range Transit Network is already looking at possible tie-ins to station locations in the north. Dr. Cog, obviously, through Fast Tracks has already done a lot of that. Springs will do that. Pueblo is in the process of updating their station area plan down there to see if the old historic Union Depot in Pueblo can be the site for the station, or if there'll have to be another location. I know you folks here in the Springs need to be looking at where your rail transit station would be, in addition to some other work you're doing too. So yes, that's definitely a key element of the service development plan.
Someday the question is, how many bike racks on the rail car? That question will come.
That could be.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time,
Thanks,
and
Norm.
we'll stay in touch. All right. We'll move on then to 6C, 2045 Long Range Transportation Plan Draft. Speaking of,
Catherine Wenger, Transportation Planner, PPACG. So over the last few months, you've heard us bring the various documents and drafts of our long-range transportation plan, 2045, moving forward. What's going around the room is the draft executive summary for the long-range plan. This is with the graphics. So the previous draft has been included in the other ones, but it was more of a rough form. And then the full draft is provided at the link in the memo as well. And so over the last few months, we've given each committee some time with our document to provide comments and suggestions and edits, and we received quite a few, so thanks everybody for that. Along the lines of edits, I did a summary document also at the link provided in the memo talking about all the comments we received. In general, I'd say most of them were kind of grammatical and suggestions on making sure that we're consistent naming conventions and things. So we've gone through and tried to update all of those suggestions. Also some clarity on the maps and making sure those are legible and making sure we have consistent labels there. And so we're working on that currently and making sure those will be updated for the final plan and for going out to the public. And then there's some other suggestions here and there that are outlined in the document. So this was just an information item this month. We'll bring it back to you next month for release to the public. So then we'll have a 30-day public comment period. And then we'll bring it back to you again for information with any comments we might receive from the public. And then again for final approval, hopefully planned in January 2020. So we're getting closer, but there's still a few more items we have to get through and make sure that we get it out to the general public so that everyone has a chance to review the document. Along those lines, during the public comment period, we're going to have 2 open houses, and as well as an online survey on our website and social media for the public to comment on this draft plan. And so there's an open house on October 15th here at PPACG from 4 to 6, and then and we'll be handing out a flyer probably next month to talk about the open houses, and then October 19th at Sand Creek Library in the southeast from 12 to 2. That's a Saturday. And so just a heads up that we'll have some public comment and opportunities for that as well.
Go ahead,
Yes.
Stan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This looks great. Appreciate it. Looking forward to offering comments. Right at the front page, I guess I have a question about the number for regional population. Because the DOLA estimate for El Paso County is 724,000, just El Paso.
Okay.
Today or in 2045 or today?
No, for 2019. For 28, for the DOLA number for El Paso County for 2018, 724,000, and this is showing a regional of 661. So I think Teller is something on the order of 30,000, and then Park is something more.
25 plus, yeah.
So we're probably at something on the order of 750,000 instead of the 661.
Okay. I will.
If you could go back and maybe reconfirm the numbers, but I know what I do know is that El Paso County, end of 2018, 723,994 per DOLA. In case you want the number.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll go back and update
Give or take
that.
1 or 2. Yeah.
Don?
If you look at page 10, it reflects more accurate numbers.
Oh.
Yes, that's true. Thank you. I will make sure that's updated. Yes, thank you.
Other questions, comments? Good. This is the first time I've seen something like this. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, so please provide any comments you'd like, and we'll bring it back next month for action.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, any other questions? We'll move on then to discussion items. Our item 7A, 2020 draft budget. This will be back for an action item in November, I believe. Casey?
Oh, right there. Sorry. Casey Partridge, Finance Manager, PPACG. Bringing to you our 2020 budget process and our dues allocation for our 2020 budget. Every year in our September meeting, we bring the allocation for dues for our 2020 budget. This is based upon the 2018 assessed value. We did not ask for a dues increase for our 2020 budget, so it is still $458,000 is what we ask our member governments to provide us for match of our grants that we use. And if you look on the attachment 1 on 7A, this will tell you what we are asking from your member government, so you can take it back to your cities and counties staff so that they know that this is what needs to be in their budget for next year. There are slight changes, and again, this is based upon the 2018 assessed value. Some of the other information we wanted to provide you is that we are not asking for any major changes for our 2020 budget. Our current joint land use implementation grant is actually supposed to end on June 2020. We are budgeting that through December of 2020 as we have enough grant money to extend that, and the work will continue into December of next year. But that will be ending. The Area Agency on Aging Award increased 7.5% over previous years, so we will be budgeting that increase in our 2020 budget, you will see. We are anticipating a 10% increase in health, dental, and vision, and we're working with our broker on renewal for this for our health insurance and benefits for next year. We are anticipating an overall salary and fringe of increase of 4.23%, and 90% of that comes directly out of our grant funding. We'll be requesting in our budget increase of FTEs, full-time equivalents of 0.10 from a 35.9 full-time equivalents to a 36. And we will be anticipating to having to budget for a new HVAC system. What is it called? The refrigerant is will no longer be available unless you go out of the country for that. So we will be needing to replace our system. We anticipate that being about $300,000, so that'll be coming through as a capital request. And then we'll be budgeting $20,000 for a state lobbyist, which is the same as 2019. The full budget will come to the board in October. It's your next board meeting for information purposes, and then we'll be requesting that it be approved in the November meeting. Any questions?
Questions for Casey? Yep, Stan.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Chair. So some of the discussions that I've been having with John and Andy were with regard to the software packages that can help simulate transportation infrastructure, and frankly, to Rocky's point about being able to, which I appreciated very much, the concept of more and more treating these things like entire systems so you can be effective at delivering the last mile. But there was this conversation about trying to have us and DRCOG and the state working with the same software packages so that when we're trying to have conversations with each other, we have an apples-to-apples comparison. I don't know if that's a budget requirement or if that's been resolved already, but if you could comment to that. And if there is a budget requirement, we might want to consider something like that.
As John's making his way up, it's a work plan requirement, but we'll bring that forward along with the draft budget. But it's a timely question, and we have some updates, I think, in that regard.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. So we have been working with FHWA, and I believe his name is Eric Phil, and he is out of the Denver FHWA office. We're working with him to come down and do a presentation to the board about this very topic. And the output of it basically is, see if I can come up with one of my clever analogies for this. It's basically the output of the model is the same. So it doesn't really matter if you're driving a Ford or a BMW, it still gets you to the same place. So we actually have a kind of a high-end model that's a tour-based model that has an output that comes out in a spreadsheet. Dr. Cog and CDOT has a model that comes out in a spreadsheet. So it isn't the actual models, and it isn't that they produce spreadsheets, because they all do. It's how they align and talk. So we're working with Eric to sort of make sure that that issue is resolved, and that he comes and he does a presentation to the board, because we knew this was an outstanding item. So Eric should be here, probably not next month, but hopefully before the end of the year, to do a presentation to go over all the sort of modeling requirements for the NPO, how our model meets those requirements, and then all of those extra things you could sort of do. So at this point, it's been, those discussions with the FHWA didn't warrant the expense of putting a new model into the budget. Because as you move forward with that, you have to get the data, calibrate the data. I believe the last time PPACG did it, Wendy, was it like in the neighborhood of like $200,000 when we updated the model? So for those who couldn't hear, the first model switchover was $600,000, the calibration was $200,000. So it's not something that we can do unless we sort of take steps. So this would be the first step. After that presentation by Eric, if the board feels there are other things you'd like us to do, we can certainly look at that. But I think after Eric talks to you all, most of the issues have been resolved, and I think we're all speaking the same language now with our counterparts to the north. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you. I look forward to his presentation.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions for Casey? Take none? Oh, yes, Rocky, go ahead.
Just a quick comment following up on Commissioner Vanderveer's. The modeling is going to be incredibly important going forward when we look at all the options that are coming forth and limited funds, and we need to make decisions about where to put the money. I'm very encouraged by the work that John is doing here and the team that he's put together with under Andy's leadership. I'm very encouraged by the direction that CDOT is going with its modeling capability, because a lot of from a commission's perspective, again, a lot of the policy development in terms of where money actually is going to be allocated is going to have to be increasingly in the future driven by a better understanding of the scenarios of where different optional places to put money get you results. So I encourage the line of thinking that Stan has in mind, and thank you for what you guys are doing.
Great. Thank you. All right, item 7B, we normally have still waiting on the State Executive Director of the Department of Local Affairs, Rick Garcia. He's expected to be here about 11. We'll move on to reports, starting with item 8A, military installation. Let's start at Fort Carson. Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning again. The time that we briefed the board last month in August, I think our 4th Infantry Division headquarters was just in the middle of redeploying. That's been completed. Our commanding general, Major General Randy George, is now back, and as well as the whole headquarters, so that was good to complete that after 9 months of deployment in Afghanistan. But of note, Major General George will be changing over command of the 4th Infantry Division in Fort Carson on 4 October. And I know a lot of you do receive invitations for that as elected officials and board members. And I'd encourage you to maybe consider coming out on a 4 October change of command with all the military ceremony and tradition that's involved with that. That doesn't happen very often. It would probably be a beautiful time to just sit there at the backdrop of Cheyenne Mountain and observe and participate with that. If you can get a chance, I think you would really enjoy it. I know when I get a chance to go to those change of commands and see the mounted color guard go across and stuff like that, it's pretty tremendous. So I would just recommend that you might want to put that on your priority list for October. Also, our 3rd Armor Brigade Combat Team is still deployed, but will be getting back by Thanksgiving time. So they'll be redeploying in November. So we're going to be full back at Fort Carson for the holidays, which has been a theme over the last few years. You have these 9 months deployments of at least a brigade combat team, and we try to get them back before Christmas, and then we send them out again. And we'll be sending our combat aviation brigade out a little bit later next year in June. So the op tempo at Fort Carson continues. There's a lot of ceremonies today that are going on because of Patriots Day, and appreciate the moment we took at the very beginning of our ceremony, Mr. Chair. But there is if you're interested, there is a 1330 wreath laying at our Memorial Park at our main gate, which is outside the gate. You don't have to get into Fort Carson. It's right there at our visitor center that we'll be doing locally, and then, of course, we'll be participating with all the other military activities with what's going on down at Memorial Park as well. And the last thing I wanted to mention is I'll be retiring over the next few months, but I have the honor of introducing Mr. Andy Byrd, who will be the next Deputy Garrison Commander at Fort Carson, and he'll be taking over in October time frame, so we'll give you more details on the actual transition. But Mr. Byrd has been a Deputy Garrison Commander down at Fort Hood, Texas, so he knows the business, and you're getting an upgrade. So.
Well, thank you for service to Fort Carson, our country, and I hope we'll see you before you take off.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you. For Air Force Academy, welcome, Colonel.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Council, thank you so much for the opportunity to provide a quick update on your United States Air Force Academy. My name is Colonel Hartless, Brian Hartless, and I've been in command of the 10th Air Base Wing for about 2.5 months, so I'm very new to the Front Range. But what I can say is that fall is a super exciting time at the Air Force Academy. It's one of our busiest times. We had our Parents' Weekend the weekend before Labor Day, or the weekend of Labor Day, and we had 10,000 parents come out, approximately 10,000 parents come out and descend upon Colorado Springs and the neighboring areas, neighboring communities, and that event just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's a very exciting time for us. Parents come out to enjoy parades and visit obviously with their cadets, and visit the school and do various things. We also, of course, had our first home football game the Saturday of Labor Day weekend. We crushed our opponent, got us rolling on the right foot forward for the rest of the year, which is always super exciting for us. Of course, that home football game means we bring in anywhere from 30 or so. Maybe, I'm sure when we play Army, we'll sell out. We'll probably be at 40,000 for that game as well. And so it's an exciting time for us. And we work very hard to make sure the flow on and off the base is efficient as it can be. Our next home football game is Friday, September 27th, and it's at 6 p.m. That's our first, I'm told, our first home football game on a Friday in about 10 years. So it'll just be something a little bit different to experience the traffic around the academy. But certainly, please come on out. We'd love to have you there to help cheer on the Falcons. We'll be playing San Jose State. That's who our opponent is. The Dean of Faculty, Brigadier General Armacost, he retires this week after his service here at the Academy, so we'll all be very sad to see him retire. He will be succeeded by Colonel Linnell Latundra. She's the sitting permanent professor of the School of Law, the Law Department. And she has, again, been named as a successor. She's been nominated, and now that the U.S. Senate is back in session, we're hopeful that her confirmation will occur soon so that she can assume that position in October and a promotion to the rank of Brigadier General. So we're all excited about that in the future. The Cadet Chapel is officially down for renovation. So we closed it to the public last Wednesday, and now we're in the phase of what's going to happen next. Is over the course of the next 6 to 8 months is we're going to build a big box around the chapel, and so that view that image that's so iconic from just about anywhere you are in Colorado Springs will now be it'll be a big box for the next 4 years. And that cover that's going to go around it is not to shroud the renovation in secrecy, but of course just to provide a protection from the elements so that the contractor can work all year round as they disassemble, deconstruct the facility, deconstruct the roof. So that'll be the image that you'll see when you look up on the mountain there. So just wanted to give you an update on that. And again, as I said, assuming everything stays on track, we'll reopen it around September, October of 2023. So a fairly substantial project there. As many of you may be aware, of course, a couple of weeks ago we released to the public and made it known that we had the presence of PFAS and PFOA in our groundwater on the Air Force Academy. And so I wanted to address that briefly here and give you an update on that. Out of respect for everyone's time and anticipation of questions that could potentially come up, I've prepared a couple of remarks here just to kind of make sure that I hit what I think the questions might be. And as well, I've got some technical experts with me if we wanted to dive into some of that. So again, as we announced a couple of weeks ago, as you may be aware, the Academy now has the presence of PFAS and PFOA. These chemicals were, of course, used for many years in military firefighting foam. And at the Academy, the foam containing PFAS and PFOA was used for firefighter training until 1990. In 2010, we resumed firefighter training, but we only use water on our firefighter training since 2010. Although we stopped using the firefighting foam in our fire training area in 1990, there was and still is a real-world requirement for firefighting foam on our trucks for real-world crash operations. That equipment was used to dispense the foam periodically to test it, where small amounts would have been discharged. We stopped testing our equipment in 2005 altogether. We still had the foam on our trucks, but we stopped testing the equipment in 2005. And that would have just been small amounts just to test and make sure that the equipment would work when we needed it. In 2016, that firefighting foam on our emergency response trucks was replaced by a more environmentally friendly version. And even so, we still do not function test the equipment. And thankfully, there has never been a real-world use of that firefighting foam to extinguish an aircraft crash on the Academy. The Air Force Civil Engineer Center, who many of you know that by name, is AFCEC. They began site investigations on the Academy in late 2018 and early 2019, and the results were released again in August that showed levels above the EPA's Lifetime Health Advisory, or LHA, in 3 areas on the base. And that has prompted an expanded site investigation, which is ongoing now. Typically, the Air Force first tests the base boundaries to determine how far that ground and surface water is impacted before initiating private well sampling. However, out of an abundance of caution, the Air Force moved very quickly to begin sampling private drinking wells off of the installation before the additional wells had been installed on our base boundary. Through our partnership with Colorado Springs Utilities, our AFCEC partners identified 37 homes and 38 private wells closest in proximity to the base boundary for sampling. And to date, 35 of those 37 homes have been sampled. We expect results from homeowner sampling in the October timeframe. If these results show PFAS and PFOA above the EPA's Lifetime Health Advisory, AFCEC will provide bottled water to those homeowners and develop long-term solutions in coordination with that homeowner as well. The safety and the health of our community is a huge priority. I can assure you that the Air Force is taking aggressive action to identify and respond to anyone with drinking water wells that may have been impacted by past firefighting operations. So that, I hope, is a summary of kind of the current events. I wanted to provide a thumbnail sketch as to the activity on the base and then the way forward with sampling. I do have some experts here if we want to dive into technical questions.
Any questions from the board? Stan?
Yeah, just a quick comment. First of all, thank you very much for providing that information to this board. I appreciate that deeply. And, of course, we've got a long-standing, fantastic relationship with the Air Force Academy. But I do want to let you know that tomorrow night there will be a town hall meeting at the Woodman Valley Chapel at 6:30 p.m., 1830. I don't know if the Academy is planning on attending, but I do know that Terry Carver and myself will be going there, and there will be others, and there will be a bunch of residents there. So that would be a fantastic opportunity for the Academy to share with a broader group from that area your plans. And to be honest, just repeating exactly what you just said to that group, I think would go a long, long way. You probably are interacting with those people already to one degree or another, but since they are having a town hall meeting, I think your presence there would really be outstanding. So I'd like to make that recommendation, and I'll chat with you afterwards.
Well, sir, thank you for that as well. We have been invited to that already and plan on attending, and I will absolutely provide the same message. And there'll be our reps will be here, our technical reps will be there to help answer any questions they may have as well.
That's outstanding. I'll see you there tomorrow night, sir.
Other questions, comments from the board? Thank you, Colonel Hartless. And Schriever Air Force Base, Ron.
Mr. Chairman, board members, thank you very much. Following on with a PFAS-PFOA item, the Schriever PFAS-PFOA site inspection report from AFCAC has been completed, and it's loaded into AFCAC's public administrative record. Unfortunately, the results were inconclusive for contamination in groundwater or surface water, so additional testing will need to be conducted, but certainly we'll be tracking that closely and make sure that we make that information available as the definitive results are determined. In another area, on the 23rd of August, Schriever Air Force Base celebrated our annual Diversity Day. Members came together to learn more about the different cultures that comprise our Air Force and our workforce through music, dance, food, and many other performances and activities. It was a great event and highlighted the diversity that we already have within our Team Schriever community, but certainly ways that we can enhance that in the future. Certainly today is a very busy day. There are a number of events going on, including Schriever leadership is participating in an annual Native American consultative meeting that's taking place at the U.S. Air Force Academy. Our Colonel Keel, our commander of the Mission Support Group, is there to support that, to make sure that we do what we must to protect those sites that are identified as culturally significant by the tribal leaders. Schriever leadership is also participating in the 9/11 ceremony that's taking place in Memorial Park now, I believe, maybe wrapping up now. But we also had our own small reveille ceremony this morning and a ceremony at our own Memorial Park where we have an artifact that Mr. Don Addy and the Colorado 30 group helped bring to Colorado so that we can certainly take time to reflect on the events of 9/11. And with that, unless there are any questions, that's all I've got from Schriever Air Force Base.
Okay, thank you. Colonel Fitch. Peterson.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, board members. On behalf of Colonel Tom Valzerano, I just have a couple of announcements for Peterson. We did receive word from the city traffic engineers that the funding did go through last week for the East Gate modification. So we'll now see that scheduled to break ground in November and hopefully be complete by the end of the year. On Monday, we had the pleasure of hosting the U.S. Space Command stand-up ceremony at Peterson. A lot of distinguished visitors and an enjoyable ceremony. Excited about the way ahead for U.S. Space Command. Still awaiting a basing decision and anticipating perhaps as early as October for a basing decision for U.S. Space Command. Next week, POW MIA Remembrance Week will have many events hosted at Peterson. We do have a 24-hour run to commemorate and remember our POW MIAs and a ceremony on Thursday, the 19th at 9 o'clock in the base chapel, if you'd like to join us. In addition, Colonel Falzerano mentioned last meeting, but he'll be hosting the State of the Wing and presenting our current operations on the 25th of September at 1500. Invitations have gone out. Please join us if you're interested. And pending any questions, sir, that's all I have.
The state POW MAOA highway, as you may know, is in Teller County.
Absolutely.
It begins at 9,100 feet elevation, so you're welcome to attend.
Thank you.
But thank you.
Mhm.
All right, we'll move on. Let's see. Terry, anything from EDC?
I'm sure that all the local CU fans will be voting and encouraging our local team, the Air Force Academy, in their game Saturday at CU, and I'm going. So for 1 week, forget CU and support the Air Force Academy.
Very good. Any other comments, questions for our military partners? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 8B, mobility coordinating. Ms. Gray.
It's already on. Good morning, everybody. I don't have much new to report other than what's already in your packets, but I just wanted to, I might have mentioned this last month, I don't remember, but we are in the process of updating the free mobility guide. It may or may not continue to be called the mobility guide, although I don't see any problem with that name, from the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments Area Agency on Aging. And it's basically a pocket guide of all open transportation to our citizens, many of whom it's to the general population, some of whom it's to Medicare, Medicaid, over 60, et cetera, throughout our region. And we've gotten updates, some additions, and we're just waiting on one decision on the one call number. And basically, we're going to be redoing this and printing, and this is great. And then we're going to have a page on the Area Agency on Aging website where we're going to put this, and then also have kind of a more robust area for more information on some closed services or general population, kind of like what the Dr. Cobb publication is, which is like a 20-page brochure. But anyway, we'll just put that on the website so people can go to it. So those are just some new additions.
For Miley? Done? Just a kind of a follow-up comment. Yesterday in this room, we had a meeting between CDOT headquarters, the Director of Statewide Planning, Rebecca White, DTD, and the Director of the VA Center on Fillmore, talking about transit, getting our veterans and military to health care.
And that's in here, too.
Great. Okay. So that conversation's undergoing and still active conversation between CDOT and the VA at state level.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. 8C, Transportation Advisory Committee, TAC. Brandy.
Good morning, Chair, members of the board. Brandy Williams, Chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee. Just a few action items last month. We went over the TIP policies and procedures, which you all saw earlier in this meeting. We also went over the TIP project obligations deadlines, which I'm hoping none of you are too much in the weeds with that. But as I keep telling the entire group, it's going to be a long 6 to 8 months to figure out how we get all those projects funded and put together. But we've all agreed we're going to be friends at the end of this process, because it's not going to be easy, and it's going to take a lot of probably long hours in negotiation. So it's kind of a heads up that we're trying to get that money spent between now and obviously when it needs to be spent. And then we just got a schedule from Catherine on the schedule and allocations for the next call for projects for the TIP. Any questions?
Those you don't know, the TAC is really where the heavy lift occurs in putting together the TIP. The TAC consists of professional transportation planners from each of our member governments. So these are professionals that do this for a living and then provide their expertise to a committee for recommendation to this full board through the CAC and to the final board approval. So thanks for the work you're going to do. Awesome.
You're
Turner?
very welcome.
Yep, Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Has the TAC ever considered what we talked about earlier with the board, whereas if a member was not able to come to a meeting, where they could call in to a meeting, because Rama and Calhan do not have people on the TAC. Is that accurate?
Well, the TAC is for the MPO. We don't cover anything outside TPR1, I don't think, right?
I'm getting a yes from John.
So the TIP, Transportation Improvement Program, as John explained earlier, the TIP is for the metro area only.
Okay.
And Rama and Callahan are outside the metro. They're in the CFR 14.
Okay.
Yep, so that maybe answer your question. Yep. Okay, thank you, Brandy.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions? Good, thank you. Got it. Check that block. Regional Advisory Council, Ms. Brown.
Sharon Brown, I am the chairman for the CAC, and basically you have covered what we covered in our meeting. I would like to thank everybody for, under the consent agenda, you approved 2 new members to cover for El Paso County. That is Miley Foster and Donna D. So thank you for that. And that's basically all I have. Any questions?
Questions for Sharon?
Okay. Thank you.
8F, Foxtrot, CDOT, monthly update. Karen? Oh, pardon me. Oh, pardon me, I'm skipping. You aren't gone yet. Pardon me, Joe.
On behalf of the RAC, Dave Betzler was not able to be here today. You've got the information in your packet. One thing of note, and also under the consent items, we approved letters to Senator Bennett and Senator Gardner relative to authorization of the Older Americans Act, which comes up for authorization this year. It has passed the House and is stuck in the HELP committee in the Senate, and we're very much in favor of that moving forward with a reauthorization that includes a funding adjustment to census levels that are not 2010. I'd accept any questions if anybody has any.
Questions for RAC or Joe?
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, I'm sorry, CDOT update. Karen?
We covered a lot of CDOT stuff today, but one of the things we didn't cover is we were successful in another grant program, so I don't know if I had said before, but we were infra grant recipients for some passing lanes on US 287 out east. And then recently, though, we won a competitive highway bridge program grant, which was for rural bridge replacements, and so we have a bunch in Park County that we plan to replace. I think one might be in Teller, but it's on Highway 24 out east and Highway 9. We have 14 bridges total. We also have some bridges on 350, which I think will be helpful for Pinyon Canyon. There's 2 of them that are load restrictions, and these are all small bridges. They're like timber or small, and they'd all be replaced with concrete box culverts or corrugated metal pipes. And so we hope to start construction on those in 2021. I think the grant was for $12 million, and then Bridge Enterprise will pay the rest of the money to get the bridges constructed. So 14 rural bridges get to be replaced. And again, Highway 350 is down in kind of Los Animas and Huerfano County, with the corner going up through Otero. So pretty excited to get those. We haven't heard anything on the build grant, which is the I-25 portion down south, but we are moving forward on getting a contractor on board for that project through what's called the CMGC process. It's pretty similar to I-25 GAP, where you select the contractor and then you work with them through the design and then negotiate for the construction bid packages.
Very good. Your question? Yes, Rocky?
Very quickly, I want to give a shout out to Karen and her team. Sometimes really small projects make a really big difference, and I think those of you who are aware of the people who are trying to find a way to stay off the gap, and we're moving from 105 and Woodman and others out to 83, that intersection at 83 and Woodman had become enormously dangerous. We got a lot of people who were calling us and saying somebody is going, excuse me? County Line Road, I'm sorry, yeah. And who said someone's going to die out there. So the good news is before anybody dies, which sometimes is a criterion before you actually spend a dollar, Karen and her team very, very, very quickly found the funds, put together a solution, and has already installed it. So really want to appreciate it. Safety is the big issue I think, for all of us, and that's a great example of being proactive about getting ahead of some of these potentially dangerous problems. So thanks, Karen.
And we all appreciate it very much. So I drove through the intersection the other day. It was great.
Great. Any other questions for CDOT? Always appreciate your engagement, Karen. All right. Our next item is statewide Transportation Advisory Committee update. I'll start off with a couple opening, and Andy and John, if you have other follow-ups, if I miss any covers. But one of the things that the staff has been working very hard is to provide meaningful input to the Transportation Commission, not only to CDOT staff, but also to those who actually hold the purse, and that's the commission. The opening discussion was led by Herman Stockinger, the Deputy Executive Director of CDOT, asking about stack priorities, members of the stack, 15 TPRs around the state, on Senate Bill 267 money. This is funds that were allocated by the legislature, and there was a good discussion, I thought, about guidance from the MPOs and TPRs in the state on prioritization. We're looking at the years of 2021 and 22. The general question was, this is what we're thinking, what do you think? Very meaningful discussion, but the theme we keep hearing over and over again, of course, from the stack is MPOs and TPRs matter. The planning that we do is substantive, very citizen engaged, and it carries a lot of weight. We're trying to get to the point where, Rock, I hope you know this, that the TC can even ask questions of the stack. We bring that back, we give that from a broad base of input from our MPOs and TPRs, and then bring back a well-considered, robust answer to TC questions through the stack. That process is kind of an emerging process, and this discussion we had on 267 was kind of a response to that opening. We also had a great presentation, a multi-agency planning. Many times we get stovepiped into this fund, this project, this method, but there's a broad range of programs from FLAP, the Federal Lands Acquisition Program, to FLTP, FLPP, the planning program, and really was an attempt to brief stack members on how these other programs might function. Our goal then purpose of that briefing was to hopefully integrate those other programs at the multi-agency level into TPR long-range transportation programs. So a whole range of things that we should be considering, and I'm pretty confident that our long-range program already embraces that. We also had a statewide planning update for some project rating and scoring at the state level. How projects move from a full list, development list, this is the 10-year program, into the actual developed through primarily the TPRs, rural areas, and the STIP. What is the process for scoring a project that's on the long-range plan into the full list, into the development list, and finally into the TPR list? And then finally, an update on the new topic of whole system, whole safety. This time we talked about engaging local law enforcement. And how do we get a better accuracy of where action's occurring? How do we measure safety? How do we measure accident, not only fatalities, but severity? How do we identify what those are? And because those are primarily reported through our law enforcement, not through a CDOT entity. Connecting those two streams of information to get better highway safety data. Andy or John, any other comments, things that came to mind? Hey, John?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, that was very thorough. I think the only nuance that I'd like to mention is, again, as we are moving forward with SB1, SB 267, and other funds, there's approximately, I forget, Karen, if it's 500 or 600 million statewide that needs to be programmed. You had mentioned that. But they're coming back to the TPRs and asking for our priority list. So the reason why that nuance is important is our TAC will be looking at that on the 19th and then bringing something back to you guys at your next meeting so that we can make that recommendation. And as you had already mentioned, Mr. Chair, we don't know what that criteria is going to be by which those projects will be judged. So we're working very closely with Karen and her team to look at that priority list. And again, not only within the MPO are we doing that, for those outside the NPO and the TPR, your contact would be with CDOT.
Great. Any questions, comments? Just a reminder, this is a two-way conversation. The meeting always starts off with TPR and MPO input to CDOT staff. So if there's an item that is a concern to a member of government here, let us know, let me know, John or Andy, and we'll carry that issue to STAC, Statewide Transportation Advisory. Should mention Commissioner Elsner is also, he represents the Central Front Range as the chair of that organization and sits right beside me at the table. So not only urban areas that I represent through PPACG, but also the urban areas through Central Front Range, the entire area outside the MPO. Dick would be, I'm sure, happy, right, Dick, to carry those issues also to STAC. So pretty well represented right here. We'll return to item on our agenda, item 7B. We have a Department of Local Affairs update. And we're going to come back to Andy, if you don't mind. Since you have the executive director, we'll come back. We'll wrap you up. I know you're not going anywhere. We'll want to back up to item 7B. We've been joined by the State Executive Director of the Department of Local Affairs, Rick Garcia. Rick, come on up to the podium. Welcome. To the podium, please. Yeah. Right around the, yeah. Oh, right here. Oh, it's you. Thank you.
Good morning. I was looking at my watch to see. I've been up since, 5 o'clock, so I'm trying to, feels like it's already late afternoon. So great to be here. I am the new executive director. I don't feel so new anymore of the Department of Local Affairs. I'm joined today by Clay Brown, which I'm sure most of you probably know is our regional manager representing the central region of the Department of Local Affairs. Just a little bit about who I am, and I don't think I want to take a lot of time. In fact, if you have questions or comments, I'm certainly more interested in hearing about those than I'm sure you are about hearing about my background. But I have some experience with Council of Governments as an elected city council member in Denver for 2 terms. I was the DRCOG representative to the DRCOG board, and actually served as chair of the DRCOG board for at least a year. And I was always on the executive committee, so I understand the opportunities and challenges that regional councils have around transportation projects. Subsequent to my time on the city council, I served 7 years as the regional administrator for Region 8 for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, based in Denver, 6 western states, including Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, North and South Dakota. So I come to DOLA with, I think, a good grasp and understanding of local government needs and challenges, and trying to make DOLA continue to be the kind of organization that I think most of you have had a good experience with, looking after your basic funding needs and around capital projects that we fund through the Division of Local Governments, through the Energy Impact Assistance Program, our Division of Housing programs that provide primarily gap financing for affordable housing projects all over the state in a range of needs in income categories. And then, of course, the Division of Property Taxation, which sets the annual, or should I say every 2-year residential property rate assessment that the county assessors deal with in their mix of taxation decisions that they make as they pass along to property owners. So it's been a great start at DOLA. I've been to every section of the state in my first 7 months or so, and this is the last kind of focused visit I've had to make here in El Paso County and Teller counties today and tomorrow. And by the way, if any of you are cyclists, you can join me tomorrow or Friday in the first leg of the Pedal the Plains between Lamar and Holly. It's only 43 miles, so I certainly would like to have your company if you're interested in doing that. So that's the other thing I'm doing a little later in the week. So, Mr. Chair, if there's other things on your plate, it was just an opportunity to be here since I was in the neighborhood and to come over and say hello and see if there's any issues or concerns or specific questions that you might have as local electeds in your Pikes Peak regional area.
On the table, anybody questions for Mr. Garcia?
Not going to let me off that easy.
Turner?
Okay, pertaining to my own local community, I come from a community of 130 people, a little
Right.
town of Rama.
Okay.
We're going to have to build an evaporation pond. Estimated cost is going to be somewhere between $2.2 million and $2.9 million. And so we're going to be looking for help to fund that.
Well, Mr. Trustee, we certainly have funded other water and water sewer treatment programs traditionally. Maybe, if you will, more often than maybe we should be doing. I don't mean that they're not valid or appropriate projects, but what I mean is that the role that the compliance aspects through the Department of Public Health and Environment, we're trying to broker a better relationship so we get maybe advance notice of what their issues are going to be with local communities, particularly those with populations of less than 1,000. That's a big chunk of change for a town your size, and we recognize there's not a lot of other places you can go to find the capital support to get those projects done. But at the same time, you got to have safe drinking water. So where can we be more collaborative with the compliance aspect that Public Health and Environment and through their Water Quality Division has in mind? There are less expensive alternatives to achieve the compliance requirement that they're looking for, those kinds of things. And I know that conversation actually is predating me, but now that I have a cabinet colleague that came in when I came in, Jill Ryan, and you may know her, former Eagle County Commissioner, we've started that conversation. So maybe at the end of the process, it may not be 2.9 million. Maybe it'd be something less or another alternative. But as you know, Clay Brown's your conduit to get that conversation started. I suspect you probably have already started the conversation with Clay.
Not yet, but that's just around the corner.
Well, he knows now, so. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Rick, thank you very much for coming down here. I'm over here.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. And being the new executive director for DOLA, this is something you're probably very, very familiar with, but I feel it's important to reiterate it. In the last legislative session, there were a lot of pieces of legislation that, notwithstanding whatever people's political views were on many of those, many of them initiated with unfunded mandates that were going to be passed down to local governments. Being the executive director for local affairs, I imagine other people will be sharing this with you, but I'm specifically interested in sharing this with you. We started off last legislative session with about $6 million in El Paso County of unfunded mandates. We were able to negotiate that down by testifying and requesting that the legislative action be reduced in those costs, or to ask the state to carry some of that, and we were at least partially successful in that. That was reduced down to about $500,000, which I would consider to be pretty successful. But part of that was the delaying of the Family Leave Act, for example, which at the time that it was originally written applied not just to businesses but also to public agencies. So for PPACG here, the analysis that we did with an employee base of something on the order of 38 people or so was a $40,000 impact, that Family Leave Act as it was originally written. And for El Paso County, it was going to be more than $1 million because we have 2,800 employees. So my request to you is to pay some attention to unfunded mandates. If the state legislature wants these things to be done, whether or not there's agreement amongst our body, whether we think that's right or wrong, at least if it's going to be done, can the state also fund it? So that can become quite an issue for us. For your awareness, and we have 2,100 miles of roads in El Paso County and a $35 million a year, and I'll reiterate that, $35 million a year budget to maintain 2,100 miles of roads. Mm-hmm. So when we get unfunded mandates of $6 million or $1 million or whatever, just a couple of years of that, and we will our transportation budget, our roads and bridges budget gets cut in half. So those kinds of numbers might not seem so big in Denver, but out here, those are huge numbers. So I'd like to work with you and make sure you're aware of that, and perhaps from time to time, as necessary, be a champion for the local governments across the state with regard to unfunded mandates.
Well, I appreciate your comments. Thank you. And I know organizations that most of you and your local governments are probably members of, CCI and CML. They do the good fight on your behalf based on the rationale you just shared. It's not often that the Dole Executive Director may be specifically asked to weigh in on legislation that's not particularly related to the department. But I certainly hear you loud and clear, and I appreciate your perspective. Thank you.
Commissioner Williams?
Yes, just I will put on Sally Clark's hat here for a minute, Turner. I will send you some information because Sally Clark would be upset if I didn't say to you that they have some grants for, communities that have less than 30,000 taps. So a community your size could probably get a grant from the USDA to help with that pond. Also, I've been attending the water fluency I call it the Water Fluency for Dummies course, but it's really for non-water providers.
I'm the dummy.
Yeah, and I will find out. We covered some potential water. It's the Division of Water Resources have some potential funding opportunities that really aren't used very much, and so that would also, you might be able to put both of those together to solve your problem.
Of course, Sally Clark is the state director of the USDA.
Yes.
Row. Two issues, Rick, from Teller County. Teller County, of course, has the gold mine, Corporate Creek Victor Gold Mine, a huge mineral extraction. One of those funds that extraction feeds is the Energy Mineral Impact Fund.
Correct.
And my understanding is that the funds for road development, paving improvements from that EIMAF fund have been reduced. Maybe could you comment at all about paying for roads from EMIAF?
EIMAF meaning?
The Energy Mineral Impact Fund.
All right, great.
Yeah.
I had that question a few months ago at the summer conference of CCI, and I looked at the regional managers before I responded, and since Clay's not looking up, I'm going to just react based on what I think the answer should be, is I don't think there's any prohibition on roads. In fact, we fund roads all over the state that are related to impacted communities, mostly county roads, gravel, some blacktop related. That is, I'm not aware of any dollars that have been reduced or eliminated for that purpose.
Well, we'll follow up on that. And then the second topic is on housing, something I'm sure that your department does know something about. The Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments has really been active the last couple of years of advocacy, legislative advocacy.
Sure.
Last week we had our legislative roundtable queuing up for the 2020 legislative session. We started off on the topic of aging, something we work through the Regional Advisory Council and and others here. The topic went quickly from aging to senior housing, housing for our seniors. One of the components of the legislature is the property tax exemption for those over age 60 who have been in their home for more than 10 years. And as you get older, you don't need this 4-bedroom house. You want to sell the house, you want to move into something more suitable, but you lose. If you lose this property tax exemption. And I don't know if the governor or your office would consider an advocacy for extending that or transferring that ownership of that property tax exemption to a different home, smaller sized home. Any discussion of that in DOLA, or where would you or the governor's office stand on that?
What do you mean by a smaller size home, but still would be owned by someone? I think the statute is 20-year consecutive residence.
10 years, I believe.
10 years,
Is it
yeah.
10?
Okay.
And that's the challenge. If they wish to downsize, if they're empty nesters now, need a smaller home, or move down in elevation.
Can they export that
Yes,
credit?
which is prohibited right now.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Interesting thought. I know that's been talked about on and off over the years. Was it the Legislative Council of CCI?
Well, it was discussed there, but it was our group last week who addressed that topic. Around the table, Stan or
another attempt at legislation to get that fixed.
Rip Carver from House 20.
House 20. And it's kind of insane to have somebody living in a larger house trying to downsize and losing their eligibility for the tax exemption.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's a fair point. I know that as Colorado continues to age rapidly, in fact, one of the leading states in the nation in terms of how quickly we're maturing 65-year age residents and over. Oftentimes, though, the downsizing decisions are not to go into another single-family property. Sometimes they're to assisted living or to townhomes or, with no maintenance requirements, those kinds of...
No stairs.
Those kinds of considerations. So my hunch is that 70-year-old individuals, if that's the age range, are not going to be going to buy a new home so I think the exposure would be fairly limited. So I think it's an interesting
Well, they may
proposition.
sell a large home and buy a smaller home cash, I would guess.
Actually, I think the circumstances, there's usually the waiting time restarts. So they wait something on the order of maybe 10 years to become re-eligible. So to your point, though, doesn't necessarily apply if you're moving into a rental for an apartment or assisted living. But when you're downsizing to a smaller house, they lose the tax benefits, they reapply, and they wait sometimes as long as 10 years.
Sure. Well, again, I think the start of that conversation sounds like it's begun, and if that is something that CCI or some of the other entities want to bring forward, we can certainly have that. We'll have that conversation probably with the full cabinet by the time the legislation gets introduced, to where we could be on one side or the other of something like that.
Several of us are on committees at CCI, and I don't know if there's CML as well from around the table here. But
very good.
Yeah, and I just want to say one thing. I really appreciate the partnership with Clay. Worked with Greg Winkler, too, on the broadband issues.
Absolutely.
Thank you for supporting your department to local governments.
You bet. And just on the broadband issue, if I may, just quickly, we have recommitted, if you will, an additional set-aside of $5 million for the next 5 years to complete the balance of the DOLA-funded broadband plans. I think we got through maybe 90% of those in the last few years. There's maybe 6 or 7 other projects that Greg Winkler has identified that still will need assistance. So we're committed to going forward with that funding as well.
Senate Bill 2, as you know, last 2 years ago, Senate Bill 2 provided, we thought about $100 million. I was talking with a contractor in Teller County the other day, that fund is actually less than what we expected. About $20 million for the first year is now down to 10, even though it's supposed to be a larger and larger portion of the total high-cost fund, not to governments, but to individual commercial contractors.
Right. And to the other point about USDA, there's a tremendous amount of resources at the federal level.
Correct.
That we're trying to get more aggressive in tapping to complete the the grids and the need for achieving at least a 95% of rural households primarily having access to high-speed internet.
And now there's a federal component, if you're aware, but Federal Senate Bill 1822 will talk about measuring accuracy of those maps. So you might want to have your, I'll talk to Greg about it, but it's Senate 1822.
Sure. Okay, good.
Corey Gardner is, I believe, signed as the sponsor for that.
Super. All right.
Others run the table. Thank you so much, Director.
If I may, just in
sure.
closing, there is an opportunity that's been available for the last 45 days or so, and some of you may or may not be familiar with it, but I just want to remind you that the legislature did appropriate about $6 million for special outreach to hard-to-count communities and populations to achieve a full count in next year's 2020 census. Of course, the U.S. Census will complete their obligation, but this is an opportunity for local governments, special districts, nonprofit organizations to make application on how they can contribute to ensure Colorado achieves a full count, which translates to, frankly, millions of dollars over the next 10 years coming into the state from the federal government based on population. So the portal is open through midnight Sunday. The 15th is the deadline, and we're starting to get proposals in. We'll be convening a meeting soon. Actually, it's scheduled for the 3rd of October. The advisory committee that's already been appointed will be making recommendations to me for funding awards to be made by November 1st of this year. So that's around the corner. If you're still thinking about it, you've got a few days to get a proposal in. Yes, Stan, go ahead.
Yes, actually, thank you very much for bringing that up. We appreciate the state's offering of some funds to help. Totally concur with the need to make sure everybody gets counted. We have actually a pretty robust complete count committee down here. I serve as the co-chair for the government subcommittee, but there's about 30 people in that committee, and there are teams gearing up to go into even some unusual places, but that includes going to the military bases, going to some of the underserved communities, but even a team going to the homeless camps and going to the universities to make sure the students and homeless also are counted. And for your awareness, and hopefully you will look upon it favorably, El Paso County will be submitting an application as well.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair.
You are always welcome back. Thank you for spending the time to do this today.
Good, thank you.
And one last quick note, Mr. Chair. Rick, thank you also for the State Demographer's Office support. Elizabeth Garner and her staff are just awesome to work with. The census discussion was a good reminder, but just a treasure trove of information, so thank you for your support there. Yeah, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, our last item on the agenda is item 8H, Executive Director's Report. Andy.
Sure. In the interest of time, just going to hit on one topic, and I'll tee this up if others want to weigh in. You mentioned the roundtable discussion last week, Mr. Chairman, with the State House and Senate delegation. Great representation, really good discussion. One thing we do want to do is get the PPACG Board Legislative Subcommittee back up and running in October so we can start taking a look at the priorities for 2020, updating what we had for 2019, and really keep the momentum going. So we'll be in touch if anybody's interested in participating with that. If they want to reach out to Jessica McMullen, she's going to start reconstituting that, and hopefully we have our 2 co-chairs back for this year. Yep.
There's 2 thumbs up.
I think 2 thumbs up for that.
Good.
Good. Okay.
Yep.
Anything else? Oh, thank you. We'll wrap up then with member entity announcements quickly around the table. Sharon, anything from Fountain? Member entity.
We are on the TV tonight. Homicide Hunter is coming down to Fountain and doing everything. There was a murder 100 years ago, and somebody found the board a few years ago when they were remodeling the house. The confession was on the inside of the board. And so Joe Kinda came down to Fountain, and they researched it. So it's better than being on the news for water again. So that's kind of sad when a murder is better than water. So anyways, watch Homicide Hunter tonight or tape it.
Hear about Fountain, Colorado. Okay.
That's right.
Okay, El Paso. Holly?
Nothing real big, just thanks to Karen Rowe again for fixing Highway 83 and County Line Road.
Very good. Nothing from Tyler? Tyler? Okay.
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Okay. Turner?
I guess maybe as close a connection as I have to this day is we had a piece of a steel girder come across the freight dock where I was working. It was all bent, twisted, and it had been shipped here from one of the Twin Towers on its way to Pueblo. And when it came across the dock, our shop steward recognized what it was, and he called for a moment of silence as it came across the dock. This, of course, was years ago. And he notified our terminal manager, who called our one of our vice presidents, who then immediately turned it to a charitable move. And then they sent a team of drivers down to where it was, to the final delivery point, and where it was going to be delivered in Pueblo for a permanent resting place in commemoration of the event. So that's my 9/11 story.
Thank you again for attending. Appreciate it. Park County? Yes. No, we were waiting for bumper-to-bumper traffic through Park and Teller. The colors are coming, absolutely. Yeah. Stan?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yesterday, we had the opportunity to meet with the governor in our offices at El Paso County. For those of you that might not know, it looks like he is making an attempt to travel around the state and meet with as many public agencies as possible. I also know he met with Fountain last night, and about a month ago had met with the city council. We had an opportunity. I thought it was an outstanding meeting, and I just want to express my appreciation to the governor for reaching out like this. We had an opportunity to express our concerns over unfunded mandates that were really, really dangerous in the last legislative cycle that we need to really pay a lot of attention to. Dangerous for El Paso County, certainly. And we got to spend a lot of time dealing with infrastructure, highways, roads, and bridges, and the need to better fund CDOT. So we had the opportunity to share our interests in that, specifically with the governor yesterday. And just a little bit of second topic and last topic, a little bit about 9/11 for me, a remembrance. So my hometown in Glen Rock, New Jersey, was the hardest hit on a per capita basis of any municipality in the United States from 9/11 because it's a commuter town into New York City, and a lot of people from Glen Rock worked in the World Trade Center. Now, it's a very small town. We lost 13 people from Glen Rock, my hometown. 12 of them were members of the same Catholic Church, and they all died in the World Trade Center. So that was a very tough moment for us. As for me, I was active duty in the military at the time, the program director for the C-130 program office. The following morning on 9/12, I was ordered to surge the C-130 fleet and get 100% of our 700 airplanes into operational status. Nobody knew what we were going to do with the 130s, but we knew we were going to need them. And I was given an unlimited budget, and 4 months later I achieved that by getting every aircraft into operational status by buying all of the spare parts and everything we needed, and we did it on a surge basis, which meant really, really fast. So 4 months later, we had put the C-130 fleet back into full operational status. That was tough times for all of us, and that's my remembrances for 9/11.
Just quickly, on 9/11, I was in uniform with the Kansas Army National Guard. I was chief of training for the state of Kansas. And we went from olive drab and focused in the Cold War wind down into a very different combat. We were considering concertina wire, razor wire around our neighborhood. National Guard facilities. We were putting M16s into airports. We were training young soldiers, 22 years old, when to pull the trigger, when not to pull the trigger in a public airport. Those are the things we were considering as a nation, and those are the considerations made at a very local, but hard decisions, and it changed my life forever. I was eventually involved in as a planner into Afghanistan and into Desert Storm, Desert Shield. So we're a different nation today, and we are so grateful for the continuing contribution of our military and first responders. Thank you. Time is almost 11:40. We're a little long over today. Thank you all for your time and support. We're adjourned.
They forgot about it.